Hello and welcome to this week's episode of John's Garage. This week we're so excited, we got another proper 70s, 80s, 90s and all the way up to 2004 supercar here. We have a Lotus Esprit. This particular one is an X180, of which only 280 were ever built. It's a 1988 example, and we're going to take it for a drive, we're going to have a look around it, we're going to have a look inside it. I'm hugely excited. Obviously, everyone wants to be James Bond. This was James Bond's car, so let's have a little look at it. Okay, so you might be wondering what exactly is a Lotus Esprit X180? Well, in the 80s, Lotus arrived with the Series 3 Esprit, which was still in the original Giorgetto Giugiaro styling, which was the origami folded paper design, lots of sharp angles, lots of sharp creases, but none of this lovely roundedness. Now, between the Series 3 and the Series 4 car came the X180, so that was the project name of this car. The styling was refreshed and brought up to date by Peter Stevens. That's Peter Stevens' fame of McLaren F1. He was the designer of the McLaren F1. It was designed in 1987 and released in 1988. So this X180 is a 1988 example. In 1988, 280 of these were produced. There was about 1,070 odd X180s produced in 1988, but the rest were all turbo. So to have a naturally aspirated one is quite a rare thing. Now, overall, in the history of Lotus, the Esprit, 10,700 units were produced. That was between 1977 and 2004, so almost over a 30-year lifespan. Obviously, there was a few improvements and modifications made along the way. So, apart from the styling, what was different in the X180? Well, we'll have to have a look at that in the interior. Mainly it was the interior. Also, the gearbox and the brakes moved, so up to this point there were a Citroen CX inboard braking system. In this particular example though, they took a 5-speed gearbox from the Renault Alpine GTA, and that meant that the brakes had to be pushed out to the side, so they were no longer inboard, but that also made maintenance a little bit easier of them. Okay, so what else was different in the X180? Well, they increased torsional rigidity by 21% over the normal Series 3 car, and they did that by including Kevlar in the roof panels and Kevlar in the sides, and that also obviously led to increased rollover protection and safety for driver and passenger. So, what drives this car? Well, you have the 2.2 litre inline 4-cylinder. This particular one has been converted to run on unleaded petrol, and it's been dynoed at 210 horsepower. So that's an increase of about 40 horsepower over a standard leaded petrol engine. What else can I tell you about it? Well, standard when it was new, 0 to 60 time of 5.4 seconds, and it would go on to a top speed of 150 miles per hour. But think about those figures, folks. That's in the 80s and all the way back to the 70s. So these were impressive figures. It was definitely supercar territory at that point. Now, there was complaints initially when Lotus launched this car, and I suppose throughout a lot of its life, but not all of its life, that it didn't come with a supercar engine as such. It was considered small to have a 2 litre or 2.2 litre engine. There was originally plans for a 4 litre V8 to go in, and they were going to achieve this by, well, essentially joining two 2 litre engines through one camshaft to create a V8, but that didn't happen. But eventually a V8 was fitted to the car, and I suppose really it became or gained its iconic status at that point. So that was in the mid-90s that happened. Now, 1988 was also the top-selling year of the Lotus. Over 1,000 examples were sold. That was its best-selling year ever. However, recession struck, and by 1991, Lotus was in trouble, and sales of the Esprit were down to 125 units per annum. So big things had to happen after that with this car, and that's why the V8 was thrown in. Okay, so one other interesting piece of information about the X180, it was less aerodynamic than the wedge shape, in the original shape from the mid-1970s, and it was also a little bit heavier. But overall, it's still a light car, weighing in at just over 1,070 kgs. And of course, that wedge shape, while being slightly less aerodynamic, is gorgeous to look at. So as I said earlier, one of the big improvements made in the X180 was to the interior comfort and ride quality and space for the passenger and the driver. And that rings true. Now, the quality of the materials, there's some lovely finishes here. You have leather dashboard stitched as well. Everything falls to place. This particular car has upgraded seats which were fitted during a refresh in around 2010, around that time there. These particular seats are from a V8. There's also one other modification to the rear of the car. There's a V8 bumper fitted as well, and the owner intends to get a new exhaust system, so the boat tailpipes are sticking out and it looks a little bit more powerful. Interior wise, good layout on the dials. Everything's nice and clear and crisp. You have some big buttons here, big warning lights I should say, which may or may not be needed. I've asked the owner, have they had any running issues with the car? And they said, no, it's actually been very reliable. They've owned it for 2 years. They've had no issue with it. Now, the great thing about Lotus and the interiors is it becomes a parts spotting special, okay? So I can tell here straight away, we have switchgear from a Morris Marina. I can also look down here and see we have Marina flaps on the door. I'm looking at the switches here and the cigarette lighter. They're from 80s Fords. There is also other little bits and pieces inside. Of course, the head unit for the radio has also been upgraded as well. There's no air conditioning in this particular car. It just has a standard hot and cold fan, and that's pretty much it. Driving position when you're in the car is actually pretty comfortable. When you're getting in and out, there's good range on the doors. It's not like a modern Elise where you literally have to fold in half to get in and out. I've asked the owner, what's the car like to drive? They said 2 things. Number 1, you have to drive it hard. If you're going to enjoy it, drive it hard. They said number 2, like all Lotuses of the era, there's no power steering fitted, and there's big fat chunky tires on this car. They said the steering around town is really heavy, but when you're out on the road, it livens up, it lightens up, and you get the sense then of what it is you're actually driving. Okay, one other interesting thing about the car is, back here for the naturally aspirated, there's a glass window. That glass window is almost vertical, and that's one way to tell, is it a 2.2 litre naturally aspirated engine fitted? The reason being is the turbo had a slanted rear window fitted, so that was one way. It's very difficult to tell which is a turbo and which is naturally aspirated by looking at the car, but that's the easiest way to know which one you're looking at. Apart from that, as I said, it has a Renault Alpine GTA 5-speed gearbox, which is pretty good to drive. It was very successful in the Alpine anyway, and is very successful in the Esprit. Anyway, I think it's about time we take this for a little test drive. Okay, so you're very welcome to the drive of the Lotus Esprit X180. Well, first of all, I'm actually really surprised by how comfortable this car is. We've taken it for a longer drive doing filming, and now it's my turn. The clutch is nice and light, throttle very responsive, gearbox shifts really well, and the driving position is absolutely comfortable. It's the first time in a long time where people have pulled in as we're filming to look at the car and to take pictures of the car, so that's obviously a thrilling experience. Of course, a true Bond car, the Esprit is. Interesting story, when they were filming the original scenes with the Esprit in it, the test driver that the studios had hired couldn't get any good action shots. He couldn't get the car to break free, such as the level of depth and engineering, I suppose, especially in terms of handling and how well it was built. They were almost going to give up on the car at one stage when they saw the Lotus engineer take the car for a drive up and down between shots. The director approached him and said, can you drive the car? You're our new stunt driver for the movies. And kind of in some ways saved the reputation of the car because they were able to eke out the performance and get those action shots that were demanded in the film. As I said, beautiful engine note in the back. It's actually a really comfortable driving position. Now, there's 1 or 2 rattles, but being a fiberglass body based on the 70s design, you're going to have that. Just going around the roundabout. Nice. The steering is actually really good. I know I'm going around a roundabout. We've taken on other roads as well. It is heavy, there's no doubt about that, but as you move up through the rev range, it lightens up. That 4-cylinder ringing in your ear. It's actually lovely. Always really nice having mid-mounted engine. Exhaust note is right behind your ear, and it's absolutely lovely to be listening to it. I find it quite comfortable. I actually don't find it claustrophobic in here at all. No trouble getting in. Now, the only problem I had was releasing the handbrake, was trying to figure out how that operates. So essentially, when you put the handbrake on, because it's down here by your right knee, rather than staying up, it just drops to the floor. You pull it back up again, press the button, and then drop it, and away you go. The owners had this car 2 years. In those 2 years, they've had 0 problems, despite the reputation of Lotus. 0 problems, 0 issues. And it's a testament, I suppose, to the restoration that was done on the original car in the 2010s by I can't remember, it's a gentleman in London. I can't remember exactly what he did, but I was told this car then was imported to Ireland by Dean Motors, and that's where the current owner purchased it up in Dublin. But it is an absolute true supercar, very individual styling. Certainly stands out as one of my top experiences in motoring is getting to drive an Esprit. I'm absolutely delighted that the owner contacted me today and said, John, do you want to feature an Esprit on your channel? And I said, absolutely, hell do I, of course I do. Living the kids' fantasy right now of getting to drive a complete 70s wedge, or in this case 1988 wedge, but a wedge nonetheless. I've definitely gone into 3rd gear there. So we're just coming through a couple of roundabouts here. As I said, that engine note right up behind your ear. Very free revving engine, light car. You can actually feel it. It wants to be driven on, but once you're up at motorway speeds, it actually settles down into a real comfortable cruiser. Only problem I can see from my perspective from the car today is that we're in Kilkenny and we are not on the south coast of France or on some island like James Bond was, blasting up through trucks shooting bullets at us and bombs going off and rockets being fired at us, and me having a panel here that I can lift up and fire a few back at them. View out of the car, forward is absolutely perfect, no problems there. Rear, well, you're not going to see much out the back, but again, the whole point of a supercar is you're leaving everything behind you for dead. Anyway, really grateful that the owner contacted me. Absolutely delighted with the experience of getting to drive an Esprit. And if you have any other cool cars and you want to submit them to the channel, don't forget to email me. If you have a dealership that has cool cars and you'd like to feature in the channel, don't forget to email me as well, or contact me via one of the social media forums. I'm going off now for a proper blast without the camera turned on, and I'm really going to enjoy myself. So adios folks, and thanks so much for all of that. Bye bye.